Oh well, by formation, I'm a political scientist,
Yeah.
a political analyst, but I took an interest in future scenarios because part of my job, if you want, is to think about future scenarios and assess them, and also understand or investigate the political, institutional, legal, moral implications of those scenarios. Given that the conference, this year's conference, was about oceanscapes and ocean resonances, I decided to have a glimpse into the future and consider some future oceanscapes, investigate the possibility of floating artificial islands colonizing the oceanic horizons in the future. So there is a connection between my usual area of investigation and the topic of this year's paper of the Austronesian Conference. I only hope the choice of the topic wasn't too extravagant, but I have a very positive feedback from the audience and the other scholars, so I'm quite pleased with what I've done. There are several issues which are included in my paper. Well, the rising sea level and global warming, environmental and climate refugees, the legal status of artificial islands and structures, Pacific migration history. Then, there's also some. There are also some aspects which are more technical. Of course, I didn't question the technical feasibility of some of the artificial island projects because, I'm not competent. But I explored the legal, moral, environmental, political implications of those future or technical utopias or those ecopolises. I tried to, at the beginning of my presentation, I said I'm going to take you on a journey in the archipelago of utopia, but don't worry, at the end of the trip I will steer a course back to today's world, today's reality. And so I ended my presentation with a reminder of the tragic consequences that rising sea level has for some Pacific Island populations. As you know, many of the existing legal rules governing the status of artificial islands can be found in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. According to that convention, artificial islands do not possess the status of islands. And I quote, an island, according to the convention, is a naturally formed area of land surrounded by water, which is above water at high tide. So a naturally formed. Artificial islands are excluded. So most likely those, especially the floating islands, will have the status of ships. The problem is, can an artificially created territory replace the natural territory of an inundated country? The answer at the moment is no. So, given that the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea was conceived as a constitution of the sea, maybe it should be modified in order to meet the needs of Pacific Islanders relocated on artificial islands of structure. It's a very controversial issue. As you know, in the 1960s and 70s, some oceanic pioneers tried, venture in creative sovereignty experiments and tried to establish some new countries on platforms in the oceans. For instance, there was an Englishman that tried to create the Principate of Sealand off the coast of Suffolk in the 60s and 70s. Unfortunately, the Principate of Sealand never got recognized by the international community. And I suspect that if a displaced island nation will try to create a new country or transfer its sovereignty on an artificial island or structure, the international community will respond the same way. The same way they did in the 70s, and they will not grant recognition on those artificial territories. So I suspect that it's up to politicians, lawyers, statesmen to advocate a new development in the international law of the sea. If the problem will become more and more severe, and actually there will be island nations relocating on artificial islands, then there will be a pressing need to modify or adapt the international law of the sea to the new situation. There are artificial islands realized as human habitats already in existence. For instance, in Dubai,
yeah,
the Pole and the word complexes.
Azerbaijan, right? As well, the Azerbaijan.
Then there is.
It's not really the same.
It wasn't conceived for the same. But then, as you point out, we have Neshta Slari in the Caspian Sea, yes. Which was a Soviet mega project realized at the beginning of the 50s, and is still operational, and has a rotational population of 2,500 inhabitants and a permanent population of 900 people. That project could be realized because, as you know, the waters of the Caspian Sea aren't particularly deep. But nonetheless, something similar could be realized in other areas of our planet. Then we have artificial islands already used for human settlement in the Maldives.
Right. Yeah.
So there are artificial islands have been with us for a long time. Technically, even some artificial islands realized during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in some European lakes are already an example of human habitat on an artificial structure. Or there is a tribe living on floating, very rudimental, but nonetheless stay operational floating structures in the middle of the Lake Titicaca in Peru. Actually, it's one of the first questions I asked myself. Can those projects of artificial islands survive a tsunami, a storm, a typhoon? Given that the majority of those projects haven't been realized yet, we have to trust the designers. According to them, yes, there will be no problem. Those islands will be self-sustaining, so they will be energy self-sufficient, food self-sufficient, and they will be designed in a way that will keep the population safe. If one of those projects will be eventually realized and tests, then we will know the answer for sure. Right now, we can just speculate. I wouldn't, personally, I wouldn't feel very secure in one of those structures. I quite like the even from the aesthetic point of view, the floating lilies by Vincent Callebaut.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I believe that those structures could be realized in order to be placed just off the coast of overcrowded megacities and provide, well, new living space for the inhabitants. In my presentation there's also a slide actually showing that, and I believe that that's a potential use of those structures. Besides the fact that the islands would be anchored so close to the coast, means that supplying them wouldn't be a problem at all. Well, even though some of the projects look very utopian, their intrinsic value is their inspirational power. Some of those creative solutions could actually lead to some real solutions that could be beneficial to not only to the future climate refugees but to the wider global community. For instance, some technologies that could be developed for those artificial island projects could actually find well, an employment in other areas. Again, like an English scholar, Matt Ridley, maintains, ideas have sex with each other to make other ideas. So, well, maybe a project of artificial islands for climate refugees could inspire a technology that will be used in space missions in the next couple of decades. We don't know. The future is open, and so imagining new scenarios, new words, new solutions is always worth.